You ready? Let's do this.
It's a ninja legend. When a long sword is on top of a short sword and covered with a red cloth, it means a challenge. No one can turn down the challenge. You're going to accept the challenge? You are a ninja, aren't you?
Hello, I'm Sabrina, aka Bria, aka the artist of the popular transgender themed webcomic, Life of Bria. And now apparently that qualifies me to have a radio show. So, today is Trans Day of Remembrance. I didn't plan to have a show on this day or to even be recording a show on this day, but it seems fate has worked out that way. I'm not gonna lie, I always have a hard time on this date. It is absolutely horrendous that as a community we even have to have a day where we remember those of us who have died simply for being themselves. Just let that sink in, especially for any cis people who may be listening to this. Transgender people are quite possibly the only group of people, other than perhaps war veterans, who are practically defined by how likely we are to have met an early death, and who have an entire day to remember that fact, and those who are not so lucky as we survivors are. And already we can see the signs that this is most likely only going to get worse during the next 4 years. And the rest of society just shrugs it off and tells us to stop worrying. They, after all, already celebrated on this day, right? They had their Trans Day of Remembrance and they can move on and forget about us, where we just all have to keep dealing with it. You'll have to forgive me. Today's show is a little impromptu. I'm not quite as well prepared for it as I'd like to be, especially since I'm still in the middle of aftercare for my surgery, and this is being broadcast from my bedroom at my mom's house. But given these circumstances, doing this show on this topic on this day is important. My guest today is, I like to think, a dear friend of mine. She's a brilliant writer and an advocate with Sparta, an organization working for LGBTQ military personnel. She also wrote a comic for Life of Bria one time, and with any luck, she'll write many more for me in the future. She also agreed to come on the show at a pretty short notice to talk about this whole election business and why it should matter to you, even if you don't live in the United States. Please welcome to the show, Brynn Tannehill. Brynn, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad I could make it.
It means a lot to me that you agreed. I've been meaning to have you on for a long time, and now this seems like the perfect time to be doing it. It's just with so much going on. I even had another show recorded for this, but just given the circumstances now, we need to change things. Things have changed, and we need to talk about it.
Changed dramatically and unexpectedly, and definitely not for the better.
No. And I'm going to cut all the bullshit. Normally I ask people what their favorite dinosaur is and stuff. Not that I don't care what your favorite dinosaur is, but we need to get straight to the point of this. You've been quite clearly articulating why this recent election is so dangerous, particularly for transgender people. What makes this different from, say, when George Bush was elected in the early 2000s?
So the difference between George Bush and today was, well, this was 2000, 2004. The big LGBT issue was marriage equality, and that's where all of the right-wing energy and focus against queer people was. Now that issue's gone, and we are down to transgender people being the entire focus of anti-LGBT animus in the United States. So whereas in 2000 and 2004, we suffered what would be described as kind of malign neglect, that they knew things sucked for us, they didn't care, and as long as they left things exactly the way they were, they would continue to suck for us, and that was good for them. They didn't need to pile on because there was no demand to pile on. This is different. We are front and center. We are the number one topic on LGBT issues, and they are in a position to do just about whatever they want. And the only thing that's holding them back at the moment is going to go away pretty shortly.
And that's just it. A lot of people, they get so held up on Trump like Trump, the president, is the problem, but it's all the other people. It's the fact that the Republicans control both the House and the Senate. I don't think that was even the case with George Bush, was it? I don't think he had, at least during one of his terms, right?
So it was, I can't remember precisely, but for most of George Bush's term, he never had a united House and Senate behind him. But what we have in the United States right now is effectively mono-party rule.
Yeah.
We have a presidency that's a Republican. We have a Senate that's Republican. We have a House that's Republican. We have 67 out of 98 state legislatures are Republican. 33 out of 50 governor's seats are held by Republicans. Most state Supreme Courts are dominated by Republican nominees. The U.S. Supreme Court is about to get its fifth conservative on it with the replacement of Scalia. We have effectively no loyal opposition left. We have no way of stopping whatever comes next, and what comes next, the first blow that's going to fall on us is, in all likelihood, we are going to lose the Gavin Grimm case, which is going to strip us of Title 7 and 9 protections, and in all likelihood reduce us to rational basis scrutiny for the purposes of Equal Protection Clause cases in the future, which means under rational basis, as long as a state or a government can state some reason, any reason that they want to pass an anti-trans law, as long as it kind of sort of vaguely makes sense, it's constitutional.
And this is something, as a foreigner, I'm not from the States, it's so baffling to me that people are so caught up on, say, state rights, why states need to be allowed to make these humongously sweeping, powerful laws. I mean, since when do state rights trump human rights? I don't, like, why do you even have a federal government at all?
Well, that's the thing, is that when you have a federal law that protects a class of people, that creates either intermediate or strict scrutiny. Transgender people don't have that for any issue except the Violence Against Women Act. For everything else, we are at rational basis scrutiny only. So what happens is that states can pass laws that increase protections for people, or they can specifically single out a group of people if they are not protected at the federal level. And we do not, unlike Canada or Australia or the UK, we don't have a human rights commission or human rights court here in the United States. So we really do not have any kind of legal protection once we lose at the Supreme Court on Gavin Grimm.
And just sort of going back to that, just in case Sandy was in the dark of that, this is the big bathroom case, basically. The boy who feels used the bathroom he deserves. You can go
this is a transgender boy who's 17 in Virginia, and they're not letting him use the boys' bathroom. And the U.S. government is, for now, under Obama, is saying that the definition of sex under Title IX, which is a law that protects gender equity in schools, that the definition of sex includes transgender people. And that the same kind of logic is used for Title VII, which provides employment protections. That the definition of sex being a protected class includes transgender people. Well, if the Supreme Court rules that sex doesn't include transgender people as a protected class for Title IX, that's going to carry over to every other civil rights law that uses the term sex as a protected class. And then after we lose that, we've lost just about every legal protection we have. And at that point, it's game on at the state level and at the federal level for whatever policies and laws they come up with.
And you've been very, I think, cogent on sort of laying out rather systematically what it is they could do to pass laws to effectively legislate trans people out of existence. You started with Gavin Grimm. What are the next steps that they could take beyond that? And I guess we'll talk about how likely it is they'll take those steps, but what would you say they do next?
So the other things that they're going to do after that is they want to pass a First Amendment Defense Act, which prohibits the government from punishing government employees or anyone within the government for acting on the basis of their sincerely held religious beliefs on marriage, which also extends to trans people and might not even be a marriage, because marriage is about man and woman and the dichotomy. And so that's going to end up affecting trans people, which means that we're going to see the federal government ruling that federal employees can basically refuse to serve or refuse to work with trans people based off of their religious beliefs. And that's something that Trump has promised within the first 100 days to try and pass. We're seeing a similar religious freedom clause being inserted into the National Defense Authorization Act, so that people within the services can ignore equal opportunity rules within the military and within the DoD, Department of Defense. We are going to see President Obama's executive order protecting LGBT people who are federal employees and contractors. They've already said they're going to repeal that day one when Trump takes office.
You know what's amazing about that? I hate to interrupt you, but I was reading, it was some sort of survey they were putting out to see what mattered to Americans that the new president could be working on. And they had like an ordinance of, an executive order of cutting funding to cities that protect, say, illegal immigrants. And so, wait, you're not okay with a federal ordinance, say, protecting people, and you'll cut funding to places that do not follow this ordinance, but you are okay with a federal ordinance that is against protecting people that then cuts their funding?
Well, it's not going to be a federal ordinance against protecting people. It's simply going to be a federal. The First Amendment Defense Act just grants additional rights to ignore equal opportunity policies when it comes to LGBT people. And then the executive order that Obama signed protecting LGBT federal employees and contractors, they're simply repealing that on day one.
Well, I was talking about a federal ordinance by the Trump administration that they're discussing about basically illegal immigrants, and that any city that protects an illegal immigrant could lose its federal funding of whatever that is. And that's just like, wait, one federal ordinance is not okay that has to do with cutting funding, but another one is? They're not even consistent on the things they're talking about, except they're consistently not liking certain groups of people, basically.
Well, yeah, that's something we're going to get to, but scapegoating groups of unpopular people for what makes America not great in their vernacular is something that should worry you. And so beyond going just beyond the immediate things they're going to do, the laws they're going to pass, we're looking at them probably trying to pursue a Supreme Court case after Grimm, which would allow employers and employees of private companies to ignore equal opportunity laws at the state level and at the city level. And so basically states and cities that have laws protecting LGBT employees, the employers could say, well, no, we're religious, so we don't have to follow those. We don't have to follow those non-discrimination laws. What we could, even worse than that, the worst case scenario, and they're definitely already aiming for that if you read right-wing outlets like The Federalist, where they want to go with this is that if you have a company that has a corporate policy protecting LGBT employees and you have a religious employee at that company, that under the existing Religious Freedom Restoration Act, we will see the Supreme Court, they're aiming to get a case where they have the Supreme Court rule that an employee doesn't have to follow his employer's non-discrimination policies if it's against his religious beliefs, so that you could have a religious employee discriminate against and harassing and refusing to work with a gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender employee, and that the company would have to accommodate those religious beliefs. And that starts getting really scary, because that means there's nowhere safe to hide for trans people, even at friendly companies, even in friendly states. At that point, it just takes one horrible, horrible person in the office to make life a living hell for a transgender employee, and there's nothing the company can do about it.
How fucking annoying would that be to be an employer? Like, I thought these people are pro-business, but you have a business, and now you have to fucking accommodate any person working for you for something that, like, they just want to have their cake and eat it too, basically, so long as it goes along with their agenda. You can't accommodate people, but you have to accommodate people so long as they're the right people for you.
So I spoke with the HR director of a major company that a lot of people have heard of,
Mhm.
And we had a conversation, and they didn't know that this was where the right wing was going. And after I got done with them, I said, you will not be able to enforce corporate equal opportunity policy as long as you have somebody claiming a religious belief
Mhm.
for why they're harassing and discriminating against an employee. And she turned to me and said, if that happens, I'm quitting and finding a new career. There's no way I could do that.
Yeah. And also the thing, I mean, here's a little reward for people who are taking the time to listen to the podcast. Next comic I'm working on is about this religious freedom horseshit. Nobody would be okay if I suddenly said, hey, my religion says I'm allowed to do whatever I want all the time. I can kill whoever I want. I can steal whatever I want. You can't stop me. God said so. You can't disprove it because God told me. My scripture's on a napkin. God dictated it to me. How's that less valid than, say, the Mormon book? How's that less valid than any other religious text? You can't disprove it. I can do whatever I want all the time. Nobody would be okay with this. Nobody's okay with Muslims, say, doing things for their religion. It all is just a matter of they care about Christians.
You know,
I'm very certain kind of Christian.
as long as the holy book that you wrote on the back of a napkin didn't have archaeological anachronisms, it would probably be more believable than the Book of Mormon. Just
Right?
saying.
Yeah, there's so many things that, like, really, even the religious, I guess we're getting into a little bit of a different discussion here, but so many things the creator of the universe could say that would be far more plausible than the things that are said in these books. And the problem is, these people don't care. They don't care about really anything other than their special club getting its special protection at the expense of whoever else they don't like. And they hide behind bullshit like religious freedom to do whatever they want all the time. And they wouldn't be okay with other people doing that.
So, how bad does the stuff that I've described sound to you
A
already?
nightmare. It sounds like the worst. Your country sounds
That's not the
awful.
worst. It gets way, way worse, and it's probably entirely constitutional after the Gavin Grimm decision.
Oh.
So that's the stuff I described to you is just the stuff that I expect to probably happen, and there's pretty much zero we can do about it. And it happens whether or not the Trump government administration is actively hostile or just engages in malign neglect the way the Bush administration did.
Well,
that's just stuff that happens whether or not they actually are gunning for us.
Yeah.
Here's the stuff that happens if they actually come gunning for us.
Oh my god, okay.
Okay? Stuff that they can do if they come gunning for us is they can stop issuing passports to transgender people with correct gender markers. They can start taking away passports that had gender markers changed from 2010 to whenever they changed the rules.
Mm-hmm.
They can start messing with people's security clearances for being transgender on the basis of having a psychosexual mental illness or a history of psychosexual mental illness. They can mess with transgender doctors' ability to prescribe medicine by revoking their DEA licenses under we don't want anybody with a psychosexual illness handing out drugs. You can, and by the way, revoking security clearances would effectively purge the federal government and the military of transgender people. Is this starting to sound a little bit eerily familiar?
Yes.
And by the way, Chelsea Manning would be used as a rational basis for why we should yank security clearances of transgender people.
She's a traitor because she's trans, right? Yeah.
So that would be their rational basis. That would be their excuse, along with the psychosexual illness. What they'll be able to do at the state level is they can start passing laws, and this won't be the Trump administration, but these are the things that individual states are probably going to be able to do, is they are going to be able to pass laws that not only ban transgender people from bathrooms, but if you have a trans person caught in a bathroom that's not the one that they were of the sex that they were assigned at birth, they can prosecute you and put you on the sex offender list. And if you know anything about the American sex offender list, that means you will never hold a job again. You will never find housing again. You are going to be living under a bridge off the grid.
You're done. They were already talking about doing in Arkansas, right? I remember hearing about that.
We don't know what's going to be in the Texas bill, but there's been times in the past where then that's been brought up. They've also brought up the ideas of putting bounties on finding a transgender person in a bathroom.
Oh my
where
God.
If you find a transgender person in a bathroom and report it, you can take them to court and whoever let them in that bathroom for civil penalties. So you can make a quick $2,500 to $5,000 for catching a trans person in a bathroom.
Hey, you know what used to do
under some laws that they proposed.
We know where they used to do things
So
like that
that's,
was in the witch trials. If you turned in a witch, guess what? You and the church split all their stuff. It's
awesome.
yeah. Oh, also in Thailand they did something similar. I spent a fair bit of time there. If a police officer caught you trying to bribe them, they would get a nice hefty reward. Guess what police officers started doing? It's you can't offer rewards for these things because now it's almost like torture. You're not creating an actual source of justice. You're just creating an incentive for people to circumvent justice. That's crazy that they would even consider
They
that.
can do other things that are trickier, like assigning civil penalties to applying for U.S. government grants if your gender doesn't marker doesn't match on all your documents, and accuse you of attempted fraud, which would basically knock anybody who wants to get a student loan out. You can start finding ways to backdoor wreck the trans community and start doing all the kinds of things that happened between 1933 and well, not all of them, but the, when I went through and looked at what they were able to accomplish in terms of effect, like getting rid of Jewish doctors and purging the German government of Jewish employees and taking Jewish people out of higher education and out of universities. You can and preventing them from getting health care. You can do most of that using U.S. policy. You don't even need laws in most of these cases.
Wow, the Constitution sure is great. I wonder, do Americans realize how much the rest of the world makes fun of them for how much they worship the Constitution like it's the gospel truth? Any piece of paper is corruptible. Any piece of paper is ultimately just a piece of paper. This is
I didn't know that we got made fun of for the Constitution. I thought it was
sorry.
footballs and bald eagles and an unhealthy waistline that got us most of the
Oh,
time.
there's plenty of things people make fun of the states for. Don't worry. There's just one more with President Trump now. Uh, it's this is mortifying, and it sounds like doom and gloom. How likely, though, do you think it is some of these, especially the more extreme things you're talking about? Do you honestly think it's a very serious likelihood? I mean, especially given like there's no reputable college of physicians of any sort that is willing now to describe being trans as a psychosexual illness. What would they have to do to circumvent that?
Well, these are the excuses they would use. And you could also backdate it to say, well, anybody that was diagnosed with a psychosexual illness under the DSM 3, 4, or 5, right? So you catch everybody that transitioned a little while ago. So there's ways you can phrase policy and law to wrap people up, to roll them up. But here's the thing, is that the likelihood of this happening, I can't put a great number to it. I know that the first few things that revolve around court cases and people passing bathroom laws, that's really, really highly probable. We know that's already happening. Whether or not the administration starts doing things like revoking passports, revoking medical drug licenses, whether they go ahead and just completely repeal the transgender military service policy, I mean, actively going after the transgender community and trying to purge them from American life via a series of interlocking laws and policies. I don't know. They will probably go for policies if they do, because those are easy and you don't have to get them through Congress and nobody in the public notices them. But I keep looking for rays of hope in the Trump transition team and in the people that they're starting to insert into cabinet posts. And I keep looking to see if, okay, they're going to moderate. They're picking people who've done moderate things in the past. They're not picking ideologues. They're picking nice, safe government bureaucrats who might have been worked under Bush, and they're operated under the malign neglect model. And I'm not seeing it.
Yeah.
I am just frankly not seeing it. And hear me out. The head of Trump's domestic policy transition team is Ken Blackwell, who is a senior fellow at the Family Research Council, which put out their own 5-point plan for eradicating transgender people from public life. It's designated an anti-LGBT hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. That puts them in the same category as the Klan and the Aryan Brotherhood. as a hate group. If you're looking at who's in charge of OPM transition policy, name is Kay Cole James. Sorry, she is a former vice president at the Family Research Council, also completely on board with the cultural genocide model. You look at Mike Pence. He enjoyed very, very strong support from the Indiana chapter of the Family Research Council, or the Indiana affiliate. And when he signed his anti-LGBT RFRA, standing right behind him was a bunch of people from the Indiana Family Research Council.
Oh, good to know they're so
affiliate.
objective in their politics.
And Trump, what we're hearing is that the Trump administration is letting Mike Pence run a lot of the domestic policy. We're hearing that he's trying to hand over as much presidential duties as possible to Mike Pence. And Mike Pence, if you look at his legislative history and his history of things he's written and said, has been remarkably anti-LGBT. So, I mean, we're looking at the new CIA director. He said some horribly anti-LGBT things. We look at who they're considering for being in charge of the Office of Personnel Management, or the Office of Management and Budget, is a man who was once quoted as saying that the government has been infiltrated by homosexuals with an agenda, tacitly implying that we need to purge homosexuals from the U.S. government. If you look at the national security team, lots of people who are very much on board with violating basic human rights. We're talking people who regard Muslims as an existential threat, who see transgender people as an existential threat to America and God, the universe, and everything. So I keep looking for some ray of hope that there's some moderating influence inside of there. And frankly, I'm not finding much in the way of evidence that something is going to hold them back from taking that step from just malign neglect to very, very active, directed, strategic persecution.
That's just it. Nothing they're doing is inspiring hope. People keep saying, give them a chance, or it won't be so bad. Or Trump likes LGBTQ people. It doesn't matter about Trump. He's a goofball. Like, he kind of seems like a guy who wanted to be president because he thought it would be cool. And now that he is, he's just going to hand it over to all the other people. And he's handing it over to this party he sold his soul to that got him elected. And they're going to run the show with their wonderful, bigoted new agenda. And that's the real problem. Again, it's not about Trump even. Sadly, he's the least of your worries. It's everyone else around him. And I wish these people who keep putting their head in the sand and saying it's going to be okay would realize it. And realize that they handed power over to these people. It's outrageous.
So there's two additional kinds of thoughts that we should probably throw in here. One of which is the thought of, oh, that's just been Brynn being alarmist. And the question I'd like to ask the people who would regard me as alarmist as, okay, one, you have people who really, really hate trans people, and they have an opportunity to get rid of us. And they think that their God kind of demands that. And that this is what America needs, and this is what God wants. So now that they have motive and opportunity, why do you think that they are not going to exploit this opportunity that they may not get again if they don't win a second term? So that's the first thing I would ask people. And the second one is, if they decide to go and do these things that are very actively persecuting, what institution in America is going to stop this? Is it going to be the Supreme Court that they just packed? Is it going to be Democrats who are the minority party in the House and Senate? Is it going to be American businesses? Do you think Lockheed Martin is going to pull operations out of Texas if they eliminate all the trans people in Texas? Or are they going to say, oh, wow, that is very, very naughty. We wish you hadn't done that, and we are very disappointed. Is Hollywood going to save us? Is the military going to save us? Are the courts going to save us after the Republicans have packed the courts? Is the American public going to rise up and say, no, we will not let you do this to our transgender brothers and sisters?
Yeah.
No. There, is our LGBT people going to rise up and save us? They might try, but they're 3.2% of the population, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's, are we going to see people in individual states rising up to do something? And the answer is no.
Well,
I cannot.
there are certain states that are doing a better job than others, certainly. You got the West Coast that seems to be more or less safe. It's not perfect, but
what can they do at the federal level?
Oh,
and the answer is they can do very, very, very little other than maybe act as sanctuaries. And they're already threatening to revoke funding for places that are acting as sanctuaries for immigrants. And that brings me to my next horrible point, if you don't mind me offering my own lead.
Let's go for it. It's your show. This is the Brynn Show today.
I'm sorry. So something that we talked about offline was this really interesting article from 2003.
Yes.
It was written by Dr. Lawrence Britt for Free Inquiry magazine on the spring of 2003.
Yeah.
What's that?
2003, long before this election. This isn't a thing that was made up to discredit Trump or something. This is
right.
This is old, very well established stuff.
Right. And he's a political scientist, and he went and studied, Germany and Italy and Franco and Indonesia, Suharto and Pinochet and Chile and and 14 or something like 14 different countries. And he found 14 elements that were generally held in common between different fascist movements.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go through them, and this is, this should be disturbing. Okay, what? I'm going to run through them.
Go for it. That's
and stop at any point if you're like, well, wait, how does that relate to the United States if it's not patently obvious?
Sure.
So
I've got the list here too.
Powerful and continuing nationalism. Okay, Trump's campaign slogan for the love of God was "Make America Great Again." That's an obvious appeal to nationalism. I don't think we probably need to dig deeper into that one.
Well, a lot of Americans would just say, no, that's just being patriotic, though. You're not patriotic, are you, Brynn? How do you differentiate?
I've spent every year of my life since 1993 dedicated to the proposition of protecting and defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Mm.
So, 2, disdain for the recognition of human rights. Well, we're talking about an administration that seems cool with waterboarding, that's cool with killing the families of terrorists, that's absolutely on board with profiling Muslims, that's on board with kicking them out of the country. That this is not a administration particularly concerned with human rights or the Geneva Convention.
Especially, it says here talking about like they will justify it because of a certain need. Sort of like with the whole Patriot Act. There, we don't want to have to do this, but we have to do this. It doesn't matter what your justifications are. You're taking away human rights.
Registries of people of particular religions. These are not. This is not an administration particularly concerned with human rights. If you look at the record of Jeff Sessions, the new Attorney General, he has a long and antagonistic history towards the civil rights movement for African Americans, and a very long and nasty history with Muslim Americans, and he certainly is no fan of the LGBT community. 3, identification of enemies or scapegoats as a unifying cause.
That doesn't sound familiar at all.
Let me see. How much have we talked about illegal immigrants taking your jobs? How much have we talked in the United States about Muslims are a threat to the American way of life, or Muslim Islamic extremist terrorists, or whatever phrase that they love to just keep repeating because Obama didn't like that phrase.
Yeah.
Calling him a coward for not using the same language that they would use. They've also, the Catholic Church and others have latched onto transgender people as being all that is symbolically wrong and decadent and disgusting and gross and perverted, and what's wrong with American culture at its roots. Yes, they may be Americans, but why are we putting up with these sorts of things? And transgender people are it. It's, oh my God, we've got trannies in our bathrooms. Oh my God, what is wrong with this country? Won't someone please think of the children? Okay. So yeah. So I think we could establish that, yes, they're scapegoating the hell out of individual groups of people for what they think is wrong with America, whether it's national security, whether it's jobs, whether it's what they see is wrong with our culture in general. 4, supremacy of the military. Without saying too much more, Trump's campaign has talked about indiscriminately increasing the size of the military. And if I wasn't trans, that would be absolutely awesome for my job security. But that's not the way you do it. You have to be smart about it. But they're just talking, we're just going to throw money at the military, and that's going to be awesome for America because tanks.
Well, the States doesn't have a big enough military as it is, the biggest in the world by a wide margin, I do believe.
And we do, but it ignores so many factors that I don't even want to go into. But just throwing money at the military is not a solution to a problem. Rampant sexism. Oh gosh. We're talking about grab them by the pussy.
Yes.
We're talking about sexual assault complaints. We're talking about what a nasty woman. We are talking about the new head of the DIA put out rules for success at the Defense Intelligence Agency while he was there that included women are not, if you want to be successful here, you better be wearing heels.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
Yeah. So, I mean,
don't forget about Steve Bannon there.
His campaign strategy manager says that we need less women in science and technology.
Yeah. Cool.
That we are against women having access to birth control, that women are around to look pretty for men and make babies. They are back to Mad Men in the 60s is where we're at within the culture of the Trump administration and his nationalist movement. Controlled mass media. So what we're seeing with the Trump administration so far is they are ignoring all the norms for media that existed in the past with like New York Times and Washington Post. Trump has accused the New York Times of going bankrupt and failing. They have punished media outlets by not letting them into the press pool. He has ditched the media recently, which is completely against what all American presidents in the past have generally done.
How do you mean ditch the media? Like he just doesn't
not inform them where he's going. Like there's generally press following the president at some point.
Doesn't sound good or normal.
But that's completely they're kind of freaking out about it because it is so abnormal.
Remember,
he's basically
transparency in the government. Seems like the media is the way the public's supposed to know what their government is up to.
So basically, what he's doing is he's saying you only get access to me if you write good things about me. So Breitbart and Fox News are going to have great access to his administration, and everybody else is going to get locked out.
Oh yeah, because no dictator's ever done that at all.
Right. So that's their way of controlling the media. That's the way they're keeping things within friendly outlets, and those are going to become the de facto official outlets for media for the U.S. government.
Oh my God.
Is what he can do, and what he's already shown signs that he is inclined to do, because he doesn't like he likes to punish media that isn't friendly to him.
How convenient, by the way, that his campaign strategist there was the head of Breitbart, right, for a long time.
Uh-huh.
A little interesting that they are going to get a nice little sweet deal there, basically.
Oh yeah.
No conflict of interest, though. It's totally cool.
Obsession with national security. I'm not going to take this very far, but the fact that everything is stirring up fear that Muslim terrorists are going to come for you. Maybelle Thornhump of 123 Dead Possum Road, West Virginia. A crack team of ISIS suicide bombers is coming for you this instant. and be afraid, be very afraid, because the Muslims, they're coming for you, really. And
A lot of people voted for
and
him just for
Mexican
that.
rapists and muggers and murderers are coming for you. And in some part of the U.S. where there's absolutely it's 99% white,
Yeah.
but stirring up fear like that of national security has worked pretty well. Religion and government are intertwined, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but Mike, the transition team, lots and lots of people who believe that there's no separation of church and state, Family Research Council affiliated folks. And beyond that, they're repealing, they've said repeatedly during the campaign, and they made a promise to the religious right that they would repeal the Johnson Amendment. And the Johnson Amendment was something that goes back to the Eisenhower administration, which says that churches, if they want to keep their tax exempt status, can't directly endorse candidates or give money to candidates, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can do causes, but they can't do candidates. Well, if you repeal the Johnson Amendment, and because churches are so poorly regulated in terms of their finances by the IRS really does not like going in and looking at them. The churches end up being a black box where any amount of money coming from anywhere could get pumped into a church. The church could take a cut off the top and then launder that money back into campaigns as campaign contributions.
Yeah, like a money laundering scheme.
Unlimited money from anonymous sources.
Jesus Christ.
And that's that's been Trump's goal. He said this since March, that he wants to repeal the Johnson Amendment, because this is something that the evangelicals and the Family Research Council desperately want. And the beauty of this is that, for them, is that, wow, well, who else could give money to churches? It wouldn't just be Americans.
Yeah.
Let's say if Vladimir Putin wanted to dump $100 million into the Southern Baptist Convention for the next election.
Jesus Christ.
Doable. And after it goes in, nobody knows it goes in, and then it can go out anywhere with zero tracking, zero accountability, either by the Federal Elections Commission or the IRS.
But Brynn, that's just free speech.
You can't see the look on my face on a podcast, but clearly the idea of China and Russia pumping untold billions of dollars into elections in order to curry favor, using churches, and churches growing in churches which are incredibly hostile to human rights, skimming off the top and becoming incredibly rich to do whatever they want at the state level. This should be terrifying. That's kind of the end of that's kind of the end of our government right there.
Well, you're talking about national sovereignty, but like it sounds like that's the way to lose all national sovereignty. You're no longer in control of how you govern yourselves. Money, whoever has money, whoever that is now in control of who governs you. That in itself is a problem.
Corporate power is protected.
Oh, speaking of money controlling you.
Yes. Well, is there any doubt that the Trump administration is going to protect corporate interests? That they're going to, everything they've said says that they're going to follow a Sam Brownback model for the United States of really, really low corporate taxes, lowering the top marginal tax rates for the top 1%. This is oligarchy. This is plutocracy. This is corporations and the top 1% getting very, 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 very rich based off of his tax plan, which they've looked at and can come to this exact conclusion. That the top end in businesses are going to end up with a lot more money than they have now. Labor power suppressed. 10. Well, labor's already more or less dead after 40 years of Republicans cutting into that and right to work states. I don't think we need to go into that anymore. It's tough to kill what's already dead.
Yeah, labor unions are... Oh, there's recently... it was Labor Day. It was on Labor Day. Say recently, it was months ago. Everyone talking about how much they're celebrating all the things that unions had done for them. And like, I don't know, even up here in communist Canada, I don't know a single person who gets these benefits. Workers don't get any of this. It's been gutted. They made sure to gut that. You have no rights as a worker anymore. And that in itself is terrifying, and these guys just want to push it further.
So 11, disdain for intellectuals and the arts.
Oh.
So, okay, quick quiz. what was the absolute best predictor of whether or not somebody was going to vote for Trump? Give me the two top things.
I would assume white and not educated.
Bingo! Yes. So the best way to figure out if somebody is a Trump supporter is, are they white? Yes or no? If yes, do they have a college education? If no, 70+% chance they're voting Trump.
And I know some very intelligent people who justified voting for Trump because they had this idea he was going to shake things up. We're seeing that it's just kind of business as usual now because he didn't care. But it's amazing how many intellectual people seem to have actually drunk the Kool-Aid.
There are, but for the most part, this is an anti-intellectualist movement. This is a movement that takes things like what science says about LGBT people or about climate change, or what people experienced State Department veterans say about how we should handle national affairs, or what economists say about trade, or anything.
Even just the notion of a pluralistic society. How can they not understand that you can't live in a society where one group dictates to everybody how they live? You don't have a monopoly on exactly what's correct, and we don't all agree on, say, even whether or not God exists or which God you need to worship. So you need to keep those things out of it and make a society that's sort of, neutral, and everyone who lives in it gets to live, not just one group of people gets to live. The fact that flies over their head just shows that, I don't know, there's no hope for human civilization, perhaps.
Well, there's definitely not a lot of hope for us right now, given that the one thing that's basically we're down to hoping they don't come for us. That's really what we as trans people are down to hoping. And there's not a lot of reason to believe they won't. Okay. So obsession with crime and punishment.
Sorry.
So obsession with crime and punishment. So in the U.S., you might know about the Black Lives Matter movement, and about the problems we've had with basically cops shooting unarmed civilians with little or no warning, and a disproportionate number of them being people of color. And this has set off the Black Lives Matter movement, but that's also been responded to with the All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter movement, which is basically we support the cops when they shoot somebody regardless. We think that most of the people who get shot by cops totally deserve it. And this is essentially a symptom of a society where we are willing to give the police unlimited power, where they have the instantaneous role of judge, jury, and executioner on the spot without repercussion. And this is where we want to go, and based off of the election of Trump, or where the Trump supporters want to go. And beyond that, they're trying to bring back things that give greater power to police, like stop and frisk and warrantless searches and things like that. So less and less individual liberty when it comes to law and order, crime and punishment.
And again, if you're a white middle-class person, you don't have a huge risk of the police thinking it's a good idea to stop you when they're following certain policies. So they don't have to worry about it. They can just say, oh yeah, they'll just search those black people, those poor-looking people, and it doesn't affect me. It'll make me safer, potentially, but I don't give a shit if it makes other people less safe.
Exactly. So 13, rampant cronyism and corruption. And I don't think we have to go very far into this to talk about
these fucking kids are in the government now.
Trump has foregone the usual blind trust for his business holdings and his personal finances during his administration. No blind trust. He's just handing it to his kids. Well, how far away is he going to keep his kids from his administration? Well, he's talking about putting his kids in his administration. Ivanka sat in on his meeting with Shinzo Abe, the Japanese prime minister, his first foreign visit, which, by the way, he didn't coordinate through the State Department. There's every indication that there is going to be zero separation between his business and who's running his business and him and the office of the president. From what I understand, the Trump Hotel DC is already getting lined up and jacking rates through the roof in order to figure out which foreign dignitaries are willing to pony up the dough to show proper respect to the administration.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I realize the United States has got more bargaining power than other countries, but like if I was a foreign leader, like on principle, and also be like, no, I'm not sitting in on a meeting where your daughter's there or where your stupid moronic spoiled children are sitting in.
Draft shooting, endangered species blasting kids. Yes.
Right? Like, it would be insulting if you're a real politician. You even have to deal with this ridiculous man, let alone his stupid spoiled kids. Like, give me a real fucking politician to talk to. Let's actually talk about managing countries and not this charade. I would just be completely insulted if I was a foreign dignitary that had to deal with that.
It's amateur hour. This is frankly amateur hour.
And that's what people want, though. They want somebody who doesn't know what they're doing because they're a normal person like them. You know, the gold chair, gold toilet sitting on billionaire who shoots endangered animals. Those are the normal people that they want, right?
Well, Trump wanted, my personal opinion is that Trump wanted the presidency like someone wants a trophy.
Yeah.
You work hard, you win it, you put it on a shelf, you let other people look at it, admire it, say how pretty it is, and forget about it.
That's why it's so dangerous.
You know, so he had no clue of how much work being president actually is. But I'm going to bring you down to the last point, which is surely we can have elections. And if this guy is a complete schmuck, we can vote all of them out and restore democracy and everything is wonderful and we're saved. No. I'm going to bring you to point 14, fraudulent elections. U.S. elections are not fraudulent, but your vote counts. It is counted exactly the way it's supposed to be if you manage to vote. But the elections are more or less predetermined mathematically through techniques such as gerrymandering, through voter ID and suppression laws that are designed to make sure that as few people of particular groups as possible vote. So college kids, minorities, those are the people that you can set up laws like, okay, you can't vote using a state college ID in a lot of states like Texas or North Carolina, right? That even though a state institution issued an identification card, that's not sufficient to vote in an election. Or in Alabama, where they closed down pretty much I believe it's Alabama, where they closed down all of the DMVs in majority black counties as a cost-cutting measure.
Oh, how convenient.
Right? So gerrymandering basically guarantees that in each district where you're doing proportional representation, you're going to get the result you want and maximize the number of seats. Voter suppression means that in places where at a state level, or for U.S. Senate seats or for state Senate seats, that you make sure that the people you want to vote for you. This is where it gets really, really ugly, is that the people who write the rules for gerrymandering and for voter ID laws are the state officials, which, by the way, at this point, 66% of U.S. states are monoparty, right?
Yeah.
So the Republicans, House, Senate, governorship, and their state Supreme Court get to decide whether or not these voter ID laws and gerrymandering is legal. And then even if it makes it past that, it goes to the Supreme Court, which, by the way, is going to be conservative packed. And that's it. And by the way, the U.S. just gutted the Voting Rights Act, ruling it unconstitutional under John Roberts' court. So most of the federal level protections to ensure that minorities are not have the ability to vote, the law that protected minority voting at a federal level is gone, dead.
How is it unconstitutional to have a rights protection?
So what they did is that back when they wrote the law, they said, okay, these areas in the country are ones that are required to be monitored by the federal government because they've had such a history of, Jim Crow laws preventing Black people from voting. Well, somebody brought a lawsuit saying that, well, things have really, really changed in our county. Things have gotten so much better, and the demographics are changed, and this is an archaic law, and it doesn't really apply to us anymore because we're so diverse and wonderful now, and that we're a really post-racial America. And the court, instead of just getting rid of that one provision, basically struck down most of the law, saying, well, you know what? Yeah, okay, demographics have changed. We haven't updated the law to reflect the changes in demographics in particular areas that are supposed to be monitored, so it's gone. And as a result, this federal election, is the first one we have had since the Voting Rights Act was struck down by the Supreme Court. And we saw Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan go Republican. None of those has gone Republican since, I believe, the 1988 election, maybe the 84 election, right, for Reagan and for Bush. It's been almost 30 years since those states were Republican. And the fact that it comes right after the Voting Rights Act was struck down, I don't believe it's a coincidence.
So it was an increase in freedom is what you're saying. Oh my goodness.
So here's the thing, is that if you think that, well, we can save everything by voting the scallywags out, no, Hillary Clinton's ending up with 1.5 million more votes than Donald Trump.
I thought it was more. I thought it was
if
like
you
2
look
million
at,
more.
it's going to end up being, that was as of Saturday, it's likely to end up being about 2 million.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of the congressional elections, like during the election for President Obama in 2012, Democrats got, I believe, 5 million more votes in the House than they did in the Senate. And they still ended up having 20 less members in the House of Representatives than the Republicans because of gerrymandering. That even if Democrats way outvote Republicans, they're still not going to get back the House and probably potentially the presidency and the Senate, and that even turning out the vote is going to get harder and harder and harder as states take advantage of the death of the VRA to pass nastier and nastier and nastier voter ID laws and voter suppression laws and laws that change how you can stack districts. Like in Texas, they tried to change it so that you don't arrange districts by total population, but by voting population. But voting population favors white people and old people. So that was trying to marginalize the Latino community. So if you think that we can come back in 4 years and or in 2 years, there's no way we're taking back the House or the Senate in 2 years.
Really?
And that in the presidency in 4 years after all these additional voter suppression laws are put in place, it's just going to get harder and harder and harder with a autocratic minority dominating an increasingly brown and young population. And where that goes is very, very ugly, because eventually that status quo will fall apart. And when it does, it's very, very rarely pretty.
So I've read, mostly you seem to be talking in response to all of this, get out while you still can, if you can.
So I'm gonna give, this, I'm not saying it's time to bail yet. That would be a bit premature, but I'm going to give the quick things that I'm looking for. Purging the federal government. If they start a purge, run. You haven't got long. If they start taking people's passports away, if they start saying, if you got a gender marker changed since 2010, start looking for a way to get out. Usually yanking people's passports like that is a way to keep them from escaping from what comes next.
Yes.
In autocratic regimes. If they start talking about anything involving revoking medical licenses. That's another good sign of transgender doctors. That's another good sign to start looking for an exit. If they start looking to start charging trans people who apply to colleges with fraud, if all of their gender markers on the paperwork doesn't match up, that's another sign that you should look at as a get out. If states start charging transgender people with sex crimes for using the wrong, I'm saying in quotation marks,
Yes.
bathroom, that's a get out of that state, pretty much immediately. So those are the things I would look at. And one other person who is a historian that I respect said if they start forming registries that are blanket registries, time to start moving on.
Yeah.
It's time to start looking for a place to land that's not here.
So this is just it. I don't even live in the United States, but I'm very concerned about this. Aside from the fact that a lot of my friends, the majority of my friends live in the States. I'm very culturally involved in the States. I'm not okay with my friends being mistreated in this way. So obviously automatically there, I'm invested in this. But the other thing that scares me is this is spreading to Canada. There's already neo-Nazi flyers being leafleted all over the major cities. There's already hate crimes and swastikas and all that same shit happening up here now. And there's already politicians that are using the same rhetoric and saying they want to bring Trump's message up here. It's spreading. The United States let its trash open, and now the raccoons are spreading it across Canada's lawn too. And this can't be allowed to catch fire into other countries. Already you got Brexit, you've got Europe, the same sort of bullshit happening. This isn't good, and we need to nip it in the bud wherever we can. Any country it hasn't hit yet, it needs to get squashed. And as sad as it is for people to say leave places that are being taken over like this, because then there's no one left to fight for it, there needs to be safe places for them to go to. And at this point, the main one for the States is Canada. And luckily, Canada does have a lot of protections in place that don't seem like they're going anywhere time soon. But this all just is really heartbreaking, and I hate it that we had to spend an hour talking about the nasty things that nasty people want to do to us for literally no reason. It's completely irrational. And
no, because Jesus.
Oh,
really?
So 100% rational, not crazy or magical at all. I'm sorry, I guess we're both outing ourselves a little tiny bit as atheists here, but seriously, your magic beliefs should have no bearing on how other people live their lives. If God actually exists, then it actually cares about what people do. Let God worry about it. It's not your job. If I die and I go to heaven and I found out God hates me, well, that's my problem, not yours. First of all, fuck God if that's the case, but that's my problem. That's between me and God. It's not your job.
Our relationship as trans people with religion, or an organized religion in particular, I think that's another hour-long conversation.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that another time. I think we're going to have another conversation under other circumstances. Hopefully, we're going to be proved wrong. Maybe Trump's going to take power by January, and it's not going to be the apocalypse because of magic. Who knows? Maybe I want you to be wrong. I'm sorry, Brynn. I hope you're wrong.
There's as bad as I put things out to be, it is possible that unexpected things happen which make those prognostications wrong. We could get a Supreme Court ruling that comes up in our favor. We could get a Trump administration that overreaches on something else, and the backlash by the public is so bad that they get scared to take out the trans community next. That they settle on a strategy of malign neglect after deciding that they don't want to overreach on something else.
It could be they realize it's more trouble than it's worth, perhaps. Maybe they have other things in mind. Maybe they're too busy persecuting Muslims to come after us. It could be any number of things. Not that would be okay, but...
Or perhaps Canada turns around to Trump and says, if you end up creating a trans refugee problem, we're building a wall where you're going to make you pay for it.
Right? I mean, at this point, I couldn't imagine a country actually wanting to have relations with this government. They're crazier than any I've heard of. And I feel really bad for you guys. And you know what? A lot of the motivation for me putting you on the show is not just to talk about how serious this is, but there's a lot of people out there, trans people out there, who voted for this. And they will have their heads stuck in the sand like it's no problem. And they need to realize that this is a problem. And I don't want to say I told you so. I don't want to blame them and say it's their fault, because they obviously are not the ones who really ultimately got these people into power. But this is what we're dealing with now, and we need everyone to be putting on their grown-up pants and being real about it, and not just pretending that everything's okay.
Well, the great tragedy in all of this is that we even have to have this conversation, because this is even a possibility at all.
Yeah.
And for everyone who wants to say that elections don't matter, or say that, oh, Hillary was, so-so on LGBT issues, and, how bad. Again, if Trump wasn't elected, we would not be having this conversation. We would not be worrying about any of these things.
And how abusive is that every 4 years or so you can potentially be legislated out of existence? That's nightmarish. Cis people don't have to deal with that. Heterosexual people don't have to deal with that. And I don't want to demonize the cis-het people out there, if anyone's listening from that group. Just realize though, because I remember, I've only actually been transitioning like not even 2 years. So I still kind of remember what it was like before. And LGBTQ issues were just not on my radar. I didn't think about it. I didn't have to. So you people, you normal folks out there, this is a real set of problems that real people have to deal with. And your votes have consequences for us. And I hope you're happy with your president, because you might have just doomed a whole bunch of people because of it. We're probably going to have to leave it at there. Do you have one final word, quickly? Any hope?
Don't panic, but stay situationally aware.
Thank you so much, Brynn. It was enlightening as always, as your articles always are. You've got a website, right? BrynnTannehill.com is like your sort of blog writing site, right?
Uh-huh.
We'll link
to some... Or it's just BrynnTannehill.com, no dot in the middle.
Yeah. I'll link to all that stuff in the description of this. We'll stay online for a sec after, but I'm going to sign out here. Thanks so much to everybody for listening on Trans Day of Remembrance. It means a lot that you took the time to hear all this doom and gloom. Please don't give up hope, no matter how bad it sounds. We just got to be real about this. I believe we can get through it. I don't know what else to say other than I love you. It's silly. I don't know. But it really means a lot to me.
Take care of yourself.
Right.
Hopefully I see you later rather than sooner, because sooner means that I'm probably parked on your living room carpet.
Right. All right. Till next time, everyone. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.